Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most important books ever written about modern China. The book is called The Turbulent 30 Years by Xiaobo. It covers the period from 1978 to 2008, 3 decades of extraordinary transformation that turned China from one of the poorest nations on earth into the second largest economy in the world. This is not just a business book. It is a story about ordinary people and extraordinary ambition, about policies that changed everything and the individuals who seized the moment when doors opened that had been slammed shut for decades. By the end of this video, you will understand why this book matters so much, what makes it unique, and why reading it will fundamentally change how you see modern China. Let us begin. The core content of The Turbulent 30 Years can be understood in one sentence. This book is a detailed narrative of China's economic reform and opening up from 1978 through 2008, told through the stories of the people who lived it. Xiaobo does not write this as a dry academic text full of statistics and policy analysis. He writes it as a historian and storyteller, weaving together the biographies of entrepreneurs, the decisions of government officials, and the sweeping policy changes that reshaped the nation. The book is structured chronologically, moving year by year through these 30 turbulent years. Each chapter captures the defining events, the key players, and the economic shifts of that particular moment. What makes the book truly powerful is how Xiaobo shows us that every major policy decision had human consequences. When the government decided to allow private businesses, it was not just an abstract economic shift. It was about a young man in Wenzhou who started making lighters in his family home. When the government opened special economic zones, it was about thousands of migrant workers boarding trains to Shenzhen with nothing but a bag of clothes and a dream. When the stock market was established, it was about ordinary citizens who had never seen a share certificate before in their lives suddenly becoming investors. Let me paint a picture for you that will help you understand the magnitude of what this book covers. Imagine the year 1978. China is a country where owning a bicycle was a luxury most families could not afford. Private businesses were considered capitalist tail-endism, a term used to describe the last remnants of the old order before the communist revolution. A farmer who grew vegetables and sold them at a market was engaging in illegal speculation. The entire economy was controlled by the state through 5-year plans and central directives. Now imagine jumping forward to 2008. China is the factory of the world. It is hosting the Olympic Games. It has joined the World Trade Organization. Its stock market is one of the largest in the world by market capitalization. Millions of Chinese people own stocks. Private companies employ more people than state-owned enterprises. This transformation did not happen overnight. It happened through trial and error, through policy reversals and bold experiments, through the courage of people who dared to try something nobody had tried before. That is the story Xiaobo tells in this book. The book is organized around several major themes that run through all 30 years. The first theme is the tension between reform and conservatism. Every major economic reform in China faced resistance from people who believed that market mechanisms would lead to capitalism and undermine socialism. Xiaobo shows us how reformers like Deng Xiaoping and local officials found ways to push forward despite this opposition, often through clever strategies like testing policies in small areas before rolling them out nationally. The second theme is the rise of the entrepreneur. This book is fundamentally about people. It tells the stories of Zhang Rumin, who transformed a failing refrigerator factory into Haier, one of the largest appliance companies in the world. It tells the story of Ren Xingfei, who founded Huawei with just 20,000 yuan and built it into a global telecommunications giant. It tells the stories of countless other business leaders whose names you may not know but whose companies now power the Chinese economy. The third theme is the relationship between government and business. In China, this relationship is complex and often contradictory. The government creates the rules and can change them at any time, but it also needs private enterprise to create jobs and drive growth. Xiaobo explores this relationship in great detail, showing how businesses navigated a system where political connections could make or break a company. Now let me talk about the writing background of this remarkable book. Xiaobo was born in 1966 in Hangzhou, Zhejiang Province. He studied finance at Zhejiang University and later earned a master's degree in economics from Fudan University. Before becoming a writer, he worked as a financial journalist and analyst. This background is crucial to understanding the book because Xiaobo brings a unique perspective that combines the rigor of an economist with the narrative instinct of a journalist. He has spent his career covering Chinese business and finance, which means he has access to sources and information that most outsiders would never see. He has interviewed the entrepreneurs, read the internal documents, and understood the policy debates from the inside. The book was first published in 2007, right at the end of the 30-year period it covers. This timing is significant because it meant Xiaobo was writing about events that were still very recent and still unfolding. He had the advantage of looking back at 3 decades of history with enough distance to see patterns and connections, but also close enough to the events to understand their emotional and human impact. The publication came at a moment when China's economic rise was becoming impossible to ignore. The country had just hosted the 2008 Olympics preparations, had joined the WTO in 2001, and was being celebrated worldwide as the economic miracle of the 21st century. Xiaobo wanted to understand how this miracle had happened, and he wanted to tell the story in a way that would help ordinary Chinese people understand their own history. What is particularly remarkable about the writing background is that Wu Xiaobo did this as a one-person project. He did not have a large research team or access to official archives that were closed to the public. He relied on publicly available information, newspaper archives, interviews with business people, and his own extensive network of contacts in the Chinese business world. This means the book has a certain rawness and authenticity to it. It reads like a story told by someone who was actually there, who knew the people involved, and who understood the significance of what was happening. Wu Xiaobo also faced challenges in writing this book. The topic of Chinese economic reform touches on sensitive political issues. The stories of entrepreneurs often involve illegal activities, corruption, and close calls with the law. Getting these stories told honestly required courage and careful navigation of the boundaries of what could be published in China. Let me now discuss the reception of this book and why it has been so highly praised. The Turbulent 30 Years has become one of the most influential books about Chinese economic history ever written. It has sold millions of copies in China and has been translated into multiple languages. Business leaders, policymakers, and ordinary citizens have all praised the book for making complex economic history accessible and engaging. One of the most common compliments is that Wu Xiaobo has the rare ability to make economic events feel personal and dramatic. When he writes about the establishment of the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone, he does not just list the policy decisions, he tells the story of the farmers who became factory workers, the officials who risked their careers to attract foreign investment, and the foreign businessmen who came to China with nothing but a handshake and a vision. Critics and readers have praised the book for several specific reasons. First, they appreciate the chronological structure. By organizing the book year by year, Wu Xiaobo allows readers to see how each decision built on or reacted to previous decisions. This creates a sense of causality that is often missing in other books about Chinese economic history. Second, readers love the character-driven approach. The book is filled with vivid portraits of real people, and Wu Xiaobo writes about them with empathy and understanding. He shows their ambitions, their mistakes, their moments of courage, and their moments of failure. Third, the book has been praised for its honesty. Wu Xiaobo does not shy away from the darker sides of China's economic transformation. He writes about corruption, fraud, environmental destruction, and the human cost of rapid industrialization. This balance between celebrating achievement and acknowledging failure makes the book feel credible and trustworthy. Another aspect of the book that has received widespread praise is its use of data and specific details. Wu Xiaobo is not a vague generalist who makes broad claims without evidence. He provides specific numbers, dates, and examples that ground his narrative in reality. When he writes about the growth of the private sector, he gives you the exact percentage of GDP that came from private enterprise in each year. When he writes about a particular company's rise, he gives you the revenue figures, the number of employees, and the key milestones. This attention to detail makes the book useful not just as a story but as a reference work that people can return to again and again. Now let me take you through the key chapters and sections of the book and what each one covers. The book is divided into 3 major parts, corresponding to 3 phases of China's economic reform. The first part covers the period from 1978 to 1992, which is the era of exploration and experimentation. This is the most dramatic part of the book because it covers the earliest days of reform when nobody knew what would happen. The second part covers 1992 to 2002, the era of acceleration and expansion. This is when reform really took off after Deng Xiaoping's southern tour. The third part covers 2002 to 2008, the era of integration and maturity, when China joined the global economy and became a major player on the world stage. Let me go deeper into the first part, which covers the years 1978 through 1992. This period begins with the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee in December 1978, which is widely considered the starting point of China's economic reform. Wu Xiaobo describes this meeting in vivid detail, showing how a small group of leaders made decisions that would change the course of history. The most important decision was to shift the focus of the party from class struggle to economic development. This may sound like a simple policy change, but in the context of a country that had just emerged from the Cultural Revolution, it was revolutionary. It meant that people could now pursue wealth without being denounced as counter-revolutionaries. It meant that farmers could sell surplus grain on the open market. It meant that private business was no longer a crime. One of the most compelling chapters in this first section is about the household responsibility system, which was introduced in the rural areas of Anhui province. Wu Xiaobo tells the story of a group of farmers in Xiaojiang village who secretly agreed to divide the collective land among individual families and keep whatever they produced after paying their quota to the state. This was technically illegal under the existing system, but the farmers did it anyway because they were starving. The results were dramatic. Within a single year, the village's grain output tripled. The story of Xiaojiang village is significant because it shows how economic reform in China often started from the bottom up, driven by desperate people who had no choice but to try something new. The government eventually recognized the success of the experiment and adopted it as national policy, but the initiative came from ordinary farmers, not from planners in Beijing. Another crucial chapter in this first part deals with the establishment of the special economic zones. Wu Xiaobo describes how Shenzhen, a small fishing village with a population of about 30,000, was chosen to be the first special economic zone in 1980. He tells the story of how the Chinese government gave Shenzhen special privileges to attract foreign investment, including tax breaks, simplified regulations, and the ability to keep foreign currency earnings. The transformation of Shenzhen is one of the most dramatic in human history. Within a few years, it had grown into a city of millions. The book captures this transformation through the stories of the people who were there, from the foreign investors who came to set up factories to the young Chinese workers who arrived from rural villages with nothing but hope. The first part of the book also covers the rise of township and village enterprises, which were a uniquely Chinese form of private business. These were enterprises owned and operated by local communities rather than by individuals. They played a crucial role in China's early economic growth because they could operate in the gray area between state ownership and private ownership. Xiaobo tells the story of how these enterprises flourished in the 1980s, producing everything from textiles to machinery to consumer electronics. They were often run by local officials who used their political connections to secure resources and markets. This created a system where business success depended as much on political savvy as on economic competence, a pattern that would continue throughout the decades covered by the book. Now let me move to the second part of the book, covering 1992 through 2002. This period begins with Deng Xiaoping's Southern Tour, which is one of the most important events in modern Chinese history. In early 1992, at the age of 88, Deng traveled to several cities in southern China, including Shenzhen, Shanghai, and Zhuhai. During this trip, he made a series of statements that effectively restarted the reform movement, which had stalled after the political turmoil of 1989. Xiaobo describes this trip with great drama, showing how Deng's words gave reformers the political cover they needed to push forward with market-oriented policies. The slogan that emerged from this period was that it does not matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. This pragmatic approach to governance became the guiding philosophy of China's economic reform. The second part of the book covers the rapid expansion of the stock market. Xiaobo tells the story of how China's first stock exchanges were established in Shanghai and Shenzhen in 1990. At a time when most Chinese people had never heard of stocks or bonds, he describes the early days of the market, when trading was done by hand signals and paper tickets, and when the idea of buying and selling shares was almost incomprehensible to the average citizen. As the market grew, it became a place where ordinary people could participate in the economic transformation, but it was also a place of speculation, fraud, and chaos. Xiaobo does not romanticize this period. He shows how the stock market became a mechanism for wealth creation and wealth destruction, and how it reflected the broader tensions between the old planned economy and the new market system. One of the most fascinating chapters in this section is about the privatization of state-owned enterprises. This was one of the most controversial and difficult processes in China's economic reform. Xiaobo tells the story of how thousands of state-owned enterprises, which had been the backbone of the Chinese economy for decades, were sold off to private owners. The process was often messy and unfair, with many enterprises sold at bargain prices to well-connected buyers, but it was also necessary because the state-owned sector was becoming a massive drain on the economy, employing millions of workers who produced goods that nobody wanted. The privatization of state-owned enterprises created a new class of Chinese entrepreneurs, many of whom had been managers of these enterprises before they were privatized. This is where many of China's biggest business leaders got their start. The second part also covers China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Xiaobo describes the long and difficult negotiation process that took over 15 years, and the domestic debate about whether China should join the global trading system. Some officials and business leaders were worried that opening the Chinese market to foreign competition would destroy domestic industries. Others argued that integration with the global economy was necessary for China to continue its economic development. The decision to join the WTO was a turning point, and Xiaobo shows how it accelerated the transformation of Chinese industry and trade. After joining the WTO, China's exports grew at an astonishing rate, and the country became the manufacturing capital of the world. Now let me discuss the third part of the book, covering 2002 through 2008. This period begins with the rise of Hu Jintao as China's leader and the launch of the concept of a harmonious society. Xiaobo shows how this period was characterized by continued economic growth but also by increasing awareness of the social and environmental costs of rapid development. The book covers the proliferation of Chinese brands that became household names during this period. From Haier and Lenovo to Huawei and Minqing Bank, IT tells the stories of how these companies grew from small local businesses into national and eventually global enterprises. One of the key events covered in this final section is the Asian financial crisis of 1997 and its aftermath, which continued to affect China well into the early 2000s. Xiaobo describes how China's decision not to devalue the yuan during the crisis was seen as a responsible act by the international community, but it also meant that China had to absorb the shock through other means. The book shows how this period led to a wave of layoffs in state-owned enterprises and created a generation of laid-off workers, often referred to as shugong workers, who had to find new ways to make a living. This human cost of economic reform is a theme that runs throughout the entire book, and Xiaobo never lets the reader forget it. The final years covered in the book include the build-up to and hosting of the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Xiaobo describes this as a moment of national pride and confidence, but also as a symbol of how far China had come in just 30 years. The same country that had been too poor to feed its people in 1978 was now hosting the most spectacular Olympic Games in history. The book ends with a reflection on what these 30 years meant for China and for the world, and what challenges lay ahead. Xiaobo is careful not to be overly optimistic. He acknowledges that China still faces enormous challenges, from environmental degradation to income inequality to political reform, but he also celebrates the achievement of lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in just 3 decades, an achievement without precedent in human history. Let me now share some specific stories from the book that will help you understand its depth and richness. Point 1 of the most memorable stories is about the rise of Haier. The company was founded by Zhang Rumin in 1984, when he was appointed to run a failing refrigerator factory in Qingdao. The factory was so bad that when Zhang Rumin arrived, he found workers using refrigerators to store feet of dough because the heating was inadequate. Zhang Rumin's first act was to smash 73 defective refrigerators in front of the entire workforce, sending a clear message that quality mattered. Under his leadership, Haier grew from a small local factory into one of the largest appliance companies in the world. Xiaobo tells this story not just as a business success story but as a microcosm of the broader transformation of Chinese industry. Haier's journey from a failing state-owned enterprise to a global brand mirrors the journey of China itself. Another powerful story is about the rise of Wenzhou as a center of private enterprise. Wenzhou is a city in Zhejiang province that became famous for its vibrant private sector. While most of China was still debating whether private business was acceptable, the people of Wenzhou were simply doing business. They made buttons, lighters, shoes, and electrical components in their homes and sold them all over China. Xiaobo describes how Wenzhou entrepreneurs operated in a legal gray area, often using informal networks and family connections to conduct business. Some of their activities were technically illegal, but they were also clearly creating value and improving people's lives. The Wenzhou model became a symbol of the entrepreneurial spirit that drove China's economic reform, and it showed that sometimes the best way to change a system is to simply ignore its rules and build something new. The book also tells the story of Lu Chuanji, the founder of Lenovo. Lu started the company in 1984 with just 20,000 yuan and 10 employees. He was a researcher at the Chinese Academy of Sciences who saw an opportunity to commercialize technology. Xiaobo describes Lu's journey from a small computer reseller to the head of one of China's largest technology companies, which eventually acquired IBM's personal computer division. This story is particularly interesting because it shows how Chinese companies moved up the value chain, from assembling cheap products to developing their own brands and technologies. IT is also a story about the importance of vision and persistence, qualities that Xiaobo finds in many of the entrepreneurs he profiles. One of the most thought-provoking aspects of the book is its treatment of failure. Xiaobo does not just tell stories of success, he also tells stories of failure, of entrepreneurs who lost everything, of companies that went bankrupt, of policies that backfired. This balance gives the book a realism that is often missing from stories about economic development. The Chinese economy is not a smooth upward trajectory. IT is a messy, chaotic, often painful process full of mistakes and reversals. Xiaobo captures this complexity with honesty and nuance. He shows that reform is not a linear process but a series of experiments, some of which work and some of which do not. The key is to keep trying, to learn from mistakes, and to adapt to changing circumstances. Let me also discuss the writing style of the book, which is one of its greatest strengths. Xiaobo writes in a clear, engaging, and accessible style that makes complex economic concepts easy to understand. He does not use jargon or technical language unless he explains it first. He tells stories instead of listing facts, and he uses anecdotes to illustrate broader points. This makes the book enjoyable to read even for people who have no background in economics or Chinese history. At the same time, the book is rigorous and well-researched. Every claim is backed up by evidence, and Xiaobo draws on a wide range of sources including official documents, news articles, interviews, and his own observations. Another important aspect of the book is its treatment of the role of government in economic development. Xiaobo does not present a simplistic view of either free market capitalism or state-controlled socialism. He shows that China's economic success came from a unique blend of both systems. The government played a crucial role in creating the conditions for growth, through infrastructure investment, education, and policy experimentation, but it also learned to step back and let market forces do their work. At least in many sectors, this hybrid model, sometimes called Chinese capitalism or state capitalism, is the subject of much debate among economists and political scientists. Xiaobo does not try to provide a definitive answer about whether this model is good or bad. Instead, he presents the evidence and lets the reader draw their own conclusions. The book also addresses the question of whether China's economic reform was inevitable or accidental. Some commentators have argued that China was destined to reform because of internal pressures and external examples. Others have argued that the reform was the result of specific decisions made by specific people at specific moments. Xiaobo seems to lean toward the latter view. He shows that there were many moments when reform could have been reversed, when conservative forces could have won out, when the country could have gone down a completely different path. The fact that reform continued and accelerated is not a matter of historical inevitability but a matter of human agency and political courage. This perspective gives the book a sense of drama and urgency that a more deterministic narrative would lack. Let me now talk about some of the specific policy debates that the book covers in detail. Point 1 of the most important debates was about whether China should have a stock market. In the early 1990s, many people in China believed that stocks and bonds were capitalist tools that had no place in a socialist economy. The very idea of sharing ownership of a state-owned enterprise with private investors was controversial. Xiaobo describes how reformers like Xu Rongji and others made the case for a stock market, arguing that it could help raise capital for enterprises, improve corporate governance, and give ordinary people a stake in the economy. The establishment of the Shanghai and Shenzhen stock exchanges was a bold experiment, and Xiaobo shows how the early days of the market were marked by confusion, speculation, and even fraud. But over time, the market grew and became an important part of China's financial system. Another major debate covered in the book was about currency reform. For many years, China maintained a fixed exchange rate for the yuan, which was widely considered overvalued. This meant that Chinese exports were artificially expensive and foreign imports were artificially cheap. Reformers argued that devaluing the yuan would boost exports and help Chinese manufacturers compete in global markets. Opponents worried that devaluation would cause inflation and undermine confidence in the currency. Xiaobo describes how China finally devalued the yuan in 1994, unifying the official exchange rate and the market exchange rate into a single rate. This decision had profound effects on China's trade and economic growth, and it is one of the key moments in the story of China's economic rise. The book also covers the debate about land reform, which has been one of the most contentious issues in Chinese economic policy. Xiaobo explains how the household responsibility system, which gave farmers control over the land they worked, was the first major reform of the post-Mao era. But land reform has not stopped there. In recent years, there have been debates about whether farmers should be allowed to sell or lease their land rights, and about how to compensate farmers when their land is taken for urban development. These debates touch on fundamental questions about property rights, social justice, and the role of government in the economy. Xiaobo presents these debates with fairness and depth, showing the arguments on all sides. One of the most striking features of the book is its attention to the role of women in China's economic transformation. Xiaobo tells the stories of female entrepreneurs who built successful businesses in a society that has traditionally been male-dominated. He also writes about the millions of rural women who migrated to cities to work in factories, often sending money back to their families and supporting their children's education. These women played a crucial but often overlooked role in China's economic development. Their stories add depth and dimension to the narrative and remind us that economic transformation is not just about policies and institutions but about real people with real lives. Let me also discuss how the book treats the relationship between China and the rest of the world. Xiaobo shows that China's economic reform was not an isolated phenomenon. It was influenced by events and ideas from abroad, and it had profound effects on the rest of the world. The book describes how foreign investors, especially from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia, played a crucial role in bringing capital, technology, and management expertise to China. It also describes how Chinese companies learned from their foreign counterparts, gradually improving their products and processes until they were able to compete on the global stage. The integration of China into the global economy is one of the defining stories of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, and Xiaobo tells it with clarity and insight. The book also addresses the environmental cost of China's rapid industrialization. Xiaobo does not shy away from describing the pollution, deforestation, and resource depletion that accompanied China's economic growth. He writes about rivers that were so polluted that fish could not survive, about cities where the air quality was dangerously bad, about communities that were displaced by mining and construction projects. These are difficult topics, and they remind us that economic progress has a price. Xiaobo suggests that China will need to address these environmental challenges in the years ahead, and that the next phase of economic development will need to be more sustainable than the last. Now let me talk about the structure of the book in more detail. Each year from 1978 to 2008 gets its own section, and within each section Xiaobo covers the major policy decisions, the most important business events, and the key who shaped the outcome. He does not try to cover everything that happened in each year. Instead, he selects the events and stories that best illustrate the broader trends and themes. This selective approach means that some important events may receive less attention than they deserve, but it also means that the book is readable and focused rather than encyclopedic and overwhelming. One of the most useful features of the book is its glossary and index, which help readers understand the many Chinese terms and concepts that appear throughout the text. Xiaobo is careful to explain terms like township and village enterprise, shougang worker, and guanxi, which are not easily translated into English and may be unfamiliar to readers who are not experts on China. This attention to accessibility makes the book useful for a wide range of readers, from students and academics to business professionals and general interest readers. Let me now reflect on what makes this book truly special and why it deserves to be read by anyone who wants to understand modern China. The first thing that sets it apart is its scope. Many books about Chinese economic history focus on a single aspect, such as the rural reform movement or the special economic zones or the privatization of state-owned enterprises. Xiaobo's book covers all of these and more, providing a comprehensive overview of the entire reform period. This broad perspective allows him to see connections and patterns that would be invisible in a narrower study. The second thing that sets the book apart is its human focus. Xiaobo writes about policies and institutions, but he always grounds them in the experiences of real people. He tells us not just what happened but how it felt to be there, to make the decisions, to live through the changes. This human perspective makes the book emotionally engaging and memorable. When you finish reading it, you will not just know the facts about China's economic reform, you will feel what it was like to live through them. The third thing that makes this book special is its balance. Wu Xiaobo is neither a cheerleader for China's economic reform nor a harsh critic. He acknowledges the achievements and the costs, the successes and the failures, the progress and the problems. This balanced approach makes the book credible and trustworthy. Readers who come to the book with different political perspectives will find something to agree with and something to question, which is a sign of good writing. Let me now share some of the most memorable passages and scenes from the book. Point 1 scene that stays with me is the description of the first private business license issued in China. In 1980, a young woman named Zhang Qiuyi received a business license from the government in Wenzhou, making her one of the first officially recognized private entrepreneurs in reform China. Wu Xiaobo describes her nervousness and excitement as she held the license, a small piece of paper that represented a huge change in the rules of life. For decades, having a private business had been illegal and dangerous. Now it was legal and encouraged. This single document symbolized the transformation of an entire society. Another memorable passage is the description of the first stock trading floor in Shanghai. Wu Xiaobo paints a vivid picture of the chaos and excitement of those early days, with brokers shouting prices, investors scribbling numbers on paper, and the constant tension between hope and fear. He captures the atmosphere of a society that was discovering something entirely new. The idea that you could buy a piece of a company and share in its success or failure. This moment of discovery is one of the defining moments of China's economic reform, and Wu Xiaobo brings it to life with his vivid prose. The book also contains some of the most inspiring stories of individual entrepreneurs. Wu Xiaobo tells the story of Wang Jianlin, who founded Wanda Group and built it into one of China's largest real estate and entertainment companies. He describes Wang's humble beginnings, his willingness to take risks, and his relentless drive to succeed. These stories are not just about individual success but about the broader phenomenon of Chinese entrepreneurship, which has been one of the most dynamic forces in the global economy. Wu Xiaobo shows that the spirit of enterprise is not limited to any particular class or region but is found throughout Chinese society, waiting for the right conditions to flourish. Let me now discuss some of the criticisms of the book, which will give you a more complete picture of its strengths and weaknesses. Some critics have argued that the book is too optimistic about China's economic reform, that it underplays the corruption and inequality that accompanied growth. Others have argued that it is too focused on big business and national-level policies, and that it does not give enough attention to the experiences of ordinary workers and farmers. Still others have pointed out that the book was written before some of the most important recent developments, such as the rise of China's internet economy and the Trump-era trade war. These criticisms are fair, but they should not deter readers from engaging with the book. Every book has limitations, and Wu Xiaobo's book is no exception, but its strengths far outweigh its weaknesses. The book provides an unparalleled overview of China's economic reform, told with clarity, depth, and humanity. It is a book that deserves to be read by anyone who wants to understand not just China but the broader forces that have shaped the modern world. Let me now offer some recommendations for how to get the most out of this book. First, I would suggest reading it in chronological order, from beginning to end. The chronological structure is one of the book's greatest strengths, and jumping around will rob you of the sense of how events built on each other over time. Second, I would suggest taking your time with each section. The book is dense with information and stories, and it is worth savoring each chapter rather than rushing through it. Third, I would recommend keeping a notebook handy and jotting down the names of key people, companies, and places that you encounter. This will help you remember the many characters who appear in the book and understand their roles in the broader narrative. Fourth, I would suggest reading the book with a map and a timeline nearby, so you can keep track of the geographical and chronological context of the events. China is a vast country, and the economic reform unfolded differently in different regions. Understanding the geographical dimension will enrich your reading experience. Fifth, I would recommend discussing the book with others, whether in a book club, with friends, or online. The book raises many questions and invites many interpretations, and discussing it with others will deepen your understanding and challenge your assumptions. Let me now reflect on the broader significance of this book and why it matters beyond the pages. The Turbulent 30 Years is not just a history book. It is a book about the nature of economic change, about the relationship between individuals and institutions, about the possibilities and limitations of human agency. The story of China's economic reform is relevant to anyone who lives in a country that is undergoing rapid transformation, whether that country is in Asia, Africa, Latin America, or anywhere else in the world. The lessons of China's experience, both positive and negative, are lessons that other countries can learn from and apply to their own situations. One of the most important lessons of the book is that economic reform is never simple or painless. It involves trade-offs and compromises, winners and losers, successes and failures. There is no perfect formula for economic development, and no country has found one. China's experience shows that the best approach is often a pragmatic one, testing policies in small-scale experiments, learning from mistakes, and adjusting course as new information becomes available. This approach, sometimes called cross the river by feeling the stones, has been a guiding principle of Chinese economic reform, and it is one that other countries might find useful. Another important lesson is that institutions matter. The economic reform of China would not have been possible without changes in the institutional framework, including changes in property rights, corporate governance, financial regulation, and trade policy. Wu Xiaobo shows how these institutional changes unfolded gradually and often unevenly, creating a complex and sometimes contradictory system. But over time, the institutions became more supportive of market activity, and this support was Crucial for sustained economic growth, the lesson for other countries is that institutional reform is just as important as policy reform, and that the two must go hand in hand. Let me also reflect on the role of ideas in economic reform. Wu Xiaobo shows that ideas matter, that the way people think about economics and society can shape the policies they support and the outcomes they achieve. The reform era in China was preceded by a period of intense intellectual debate about the nature of socialism and the role of the market. This debate was not just academic. It had real consequences for policy and for people's lives. The ideas that won out, the idea that socialism could coexist with market mechanisms, the idea that development was the most important goal, shaped the direction of Chinese economic reform in profound ways. Understanding the role of ideas helps us understand why reform happened when and where it did, and why it took the particular form that it did. Now let me share some specific insights from the book that I find particularly valuable and thought-provoking. Point 1 insight is about the importance of local experimentation. Wu Xiaobo shows that many of the most important reforms in China started at the local level, in specific provinces or cities, before being adopted nationally. The household responsibility system started in Anhui province. The special economic zones were first established in Guangdong province. The stock market was first tested in Shanghai and Shenzhen. This pattern of local experimentation followed by national adoption has been a key feature of Chinese governance, and it allows for policy learning and adaptation that top-down reform systems often lack. Another insight is about the role of crisis in driving reform. Wu Xiaobo shows that many of the most important reforms in China were responses to crises, whether economic crises, social crises, or political crises. The household responsibility system was a response to rural poverty and food shortages. The special economic zones were a response to the need for foreign investment and technology. The privatization of state-owned enterprises was a response to the fiscal crisis of the state sector. Crises create the political will and the sense of urgency that make reform possible, and Wu Xiaobo's book is full of examples of this pattern. A third insight is about the importance of persistence and patience. Wu Xiaobo shows that economic reform in China was not a series of bold sweeping moves but a gradual process of small steps and incremental changes. Some reforms took decades to fully implement, some policies were reversed and then re-implemented, some experiments failed and had to be tried again. The key was to keep moving forward, even when progress was slow and setbacks were frequent. This patience and persistence is a lesson that applies not just to national economic reform but to individual lives as well. Let me now discuss the book's treatment of some of the more controversial topics in Chinese economic history. Point 1 controversial topic is the role of corruption in China's economic development. Wu Xiaobo does not ignore corruption, he writes about it frankly and in detail, describing how bribery, embezzlement, and favoritism were common features of the reform era. He also discusses the debate about whether corruption is a necessary evil of rapid economic transformation or a cancer that will ultimately undermine growth. This is a difficult topic, and Wu Xiaobo handles it with honesty and nuance, presenting the evidence and the arguments without taking a simplistic position. Another controversial topic is the treatment of workers during the reform era. Wu Xiaobo writes about the millions of workers who lost their jobs when state-owned enterprises were privatized, and about the difficult conditions that many workers faced in the new private sector. He also writes about the migrant worker population, who have been the backbone of China's manufacturing boom but who often face discrimination and exploitation. These are important and sensitive topics, and Wu Xiaobo treats them with the seriousness and respect they deserve. Let me now talk about the book's coverage of the tech industry in China. Wu Xiaobo tells the story of how China's technology sector grew from a small and backward industry into one of the most dynamic and innovative sectors in the world. He describes the early days of the computer industry in China, when the country was heavily dependent on foreign technology and had little domestic capacity. He then traces the growth of companies like Lenovo, Huawei, and Alibaba, showing how they moved from imitation to innovation and from domestic markets to global markets. This story is one of the most exciting in the book, and it shows that China's economic reform was not just about manufacturing and exports but about creating new industries and new capabilities. The book also covers the rise of the service sector in China, which has been one of the most important structural changes in the Chinese economy. Wu Xiaobo describes how services, from banking and insurance to education and healthcare, grew from neglected sectors into major contributors to GDP and employment. He shows how this transformation created new opportunities for entrepreneurs and new challenges for regulators, and how the service sector continues to evolve and expand. The growth of the service sector is a sign of economic maturation, and Wu Xiaobo's coverage of it adds depth and balance to the overall narrative. Let me now reflect on the emotional impact of reading this book. The Turbulent 30 Years is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an emotional experience. Reading about the struggles and successes of the Chinese people over these 30 years is both inspiring and heartbreaking. It is inspiring to see what people can achieve when given the freedom and the opportunity to pursue their dreams. It is heartbreaking to see the suffering and the sacrifice that accompanied that achievement. Wu Xiaobo captures both emotions with honesty and sensitivity, and this emotional resonance is one of the book's greatest strengths. One of the most moving passages in the book is the description of the Shougang workers, the millions of state-owned enterprise workers who were laid off during the privatization wave of the late 1990s. Wu Xiaobo tells their stories with compassion and respect, showing how they struggled to find new jobs and new ways to support their families. Some of them succeeded, starting small businesses and finding new careers. Others did not, and spent their remaining years in poverty and despair. These stories remind us that economic reform is not just about GDP growth and stock market indices. It is about real people with real lives, and the human cost of progress is something that should never be forgotten. Let me now offer some final thoughts on why this book is so important and why I recommend it so strongly. The Turbulent 30 Years is a book that deserves to be read by everyone, not just by people who are interested in China or in business history. It is a book about the human capacity for change and adaptation, about the power of ideas and institutions to shape outcomes, about the complexity and messiness of history. It is a book that challenges simple narratives and encourages nuanced thinking. It is a book that celebrates achievement while acknowledging failure, that honors the past while looking to the future. In the end, The Turbulent 30 Years by Xiaobo is a testament to the power of storytelling to illuminate history. Xiaobo has taken 3 decades of complex and often confusing events and turned them into a coherent and compelling narrative. He has given us a book that is both informative and inspiring, both rigorous and accessible, both optimistic and honest. If you want to understand modern China, this is the book you should read. If you want to understand the forces that have shaped our world, this is the book you should read. And if you want to read a book that will stay with you long after you have finished it, this is the book you should read. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.